Welcome to the Live Big podcast, where real estate expert Nick Paynes shows you that everyone can build wealth through real estate investing. Nick and his featured guests will give you the tools, resources, and expert information you need to leverage real estate into a wealth-building strategy, so you can stop worrying about your 9-to-5 and start to live big. Here's Nick with today's episode.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Live Big podcast. Today we are going to talk about the home buying process, not only for the first time home buyer, but for maybe a person who hasn't purchased a home in a little bit. So we're going to go through some topics and just a kind of a step-by-step process of what you should be doing when you're looking to buy a home. So let's get started. The first thing I think that you should be doing, maybe outside of contacting a real estate professional or a mortgage professional, is just to define your budget. And this piece can come with that contact. So maybe contact your real estate professional and talk to them a little bit about, what you should be spending on a home or what you could be spending on a home. So, you need to look at your financial situation, consider your income, your expenses, any current existing debts you have, car payments, things like that. And then you can use online calculators, or you can have, a real estate professional kind of walk you through this process. Your second piece is going to be getting approved for that mortgage. So, this day and age, we really aren't putting in offers, and sellers aren't even really considering offers by anybody who is not pre-approved. So not only does the seller not want to work with a buyer who has not been pre-approved, but generally a real estate broker is not going to want to write an offer for someone they don't know has been or has the ability to be approved for that particular property. So the pre-approval process is really the next most important piece. So get with your local mortgage professional. It gives you a clear understanding not only of your budget, but also what things actually cost. So even if you might be qualified for a certain mortgage payment, does it mean that you're actually comfortable with that mortgage payment? Once you have the kind of financial pieces in place, the next thing to do is really to kind of create a list and start to understand what your wants and what your needs are. So I always tell people kind of create a list of must-haves versus, would like to have in a home. So could be, for example, you must have 2 bedrooms, but 3 would be really nice. Or you must have a place off street to park your car, but a garage would be really nice. So you could deal with a carport, but preferably you'd like to have a garage. So start putting down some of those things that are the must-haves versus the would really like to have. And then once you have that budget set in place, you can start to go through those and look like, are these realistic things that you can get? If your must-haves are, a 4-bedroom single family house, but your budget's $200,000, that's not realistic. So then all of a sudden we start eliminating your must-haves, and now it needs to truly be like, well, is that truly a must-have? Because if it is, you're just not buying a property right now. Or if it's like no, I guess I could deal with a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom, or I could go to a condo or a townhome, then we have a little better, understanding of where you can be and where you need to be. Okay, so if you have any specific features that are important to you, that's important as well. So and start to think outside the box a little bit. I have a lot of clients that I work with that say, oh, I've got to have a yard, right? Okay, well, why do you have to have a yard? So we ask as real estate professionals why you have to have a yard, because not just having a yard is important. I want to know why. There's a story about a guy who was looking to buy a single family residence, and it was a must-have that he had to have a yard. And without the secondary question, they would have probably never found a place, because single family residences with yards were not in his price range. And so they were looking and looking and looking. And finally, the real estate agent asked, why is it that you have to have a yard? And he says, well, I didn't have a yard growing up, and I want to be able to play baseball. I want to be able to play catch with my son. And it's really important for me to have that space to do that. So what ended up happening was they found the perfect townhome, where out the front door of that townhome was a big open park where the guy and his son could go play catch and play baseball every day. And you didn't need to have a backyard for that. So having a better understanding, or making sure your real estate agent, real estate broker has a really good understanding of why you have your must-haves and your would like to haves, because a lot of times we can help you think outside the box. Like, well, you don't necessarily need that if you have this, right? And gives you a better, another way to look at things. So really understand those needs and wants. And then once you understand what you need and what you want, then you can start to research your neighborhoods and know what areas that you want to be in, right? So researching the neighborhoods has to come after that, after we define a budget and after we know what your needs and wants are, because certain neighborhoods are not going to fit within that budget or have the things that you want or need, right? So you're going to start to explore those neighborhoods that are going to align with your preferences, with different lifestyles that you may be looking for. And you'll want to consider obviously your factors like your proximity to work, your schools, what school district you're in, if you're close to public transportation, what amenities are close by. We have something that we call a walk score. And so it's basically like a walkability, how walkable your property is from local amenities, right? So looking for something with a high walk score could be desirable, and those things will help with resale value as well, right? The more walkable the property is, the closer it is to public transportation, the better school district it's in. All of those things are going to be beneficial when it comes to resale of the property or selling the property again. Obviously, if you haven't done so already, this is the point where you're going to want to figure out a real estate agent, somebody to work with. I recommend doing this a lot earlier in the process, because they can save you a lot of the hardship of trying to reinvent the wheel with some of these earlier processes. They can get you through them really quickly. So, but find somebody who understands the local market, who is a good negotiator, and somebody that's going to kind of go to bat for you and truly be a fiduciary for you. And work on your behalf. So they're going to have access to all the listings through the MLS. You will too, through Zillow and online syndicated websites and things like that. But really, they've gone through this process. They should be going through this process multiple times a month, and they're going to help be able to guide you through the paperwork, help you negotiate, and advise you on what is good and what's not good. One of the interesting statistics is that transactions that go without agents, especially on both sides, like a for sale by owner selling to a buy side or selling to a buyer without an agent, the amount of times that these transactions fall through is more often than not. So much higher than 50% these transactions fall through. And a lot of it's because each of the parties doesn't have a really good understanding of what the process is supposed to look like. So for example, we see it all the time where inspections come back after our buyer performs an inspection. That inspection comes back and we have buyers that immediately kind of pull back and get this remorse about buying a home. Well, if you're an agent that's doing 20, 30 buy-side transactions per year, you're seeing these reports all the time. And it's a lot easier to go to that buyer and say, hey, this report actually is not that bad. This is fairly common for, a resale property to have these issues, and kind of talk that buyer off the ledge and show them how we go about remedying the problems versus just thinking that we need to terminate contract altogether. So having just somebody that has gone through the process many times, that understands what normal looks like, is hugely beneficial to keeping transactions together. Okay. You can start to attend open houses. So this is another good way to find a local agent. If you don't have a local agent, you can attend an open house or attend multiple open houses. Those agents are there looking for people to work with. So you can get a feel for different properties in particular neighborhoods. If you've got a particular neighborhood you like, go to all the open houses in that neighborhood. And then you'll start to really understand, the local market and the local property values in that particular location as well. So once you're out there looking, we have a rule of thumb that we kind of talk about in real estate. And so generally speaking, what we're looking for is what we call the 80-10-10 rule. And the 80-10-10 rule says that if the property has 80% of what you're looking for, it fulfills 80% of your needs, 10% doesn't fulfill your needs, but it can be changed. So maybe you don't like the paint or you don't like the flooring. Those are things that can be changed. And then the last 10% is not what you like, but you can live with it and it's not changeable. That could be location. Like, I don't really want to live near a busy street, and maybe this property is just one block off of a busy street. That can never be changed. So can you live with it, right? So 80-10-10, 80% that it has what you like, 80% or 10% could be changed, and the last 10% you can live with. Rule of thumb is if you find something that lands in that category, it's usually it's going to be a good fit for you. So we're not going to find 100% of what we like all the time. It's never going to be within your budget regardless. So even somebody else's, your dream home that somebody else is living in is not their dream home. That they have something they don't like about the property, and something that they'd like to like to be able to change. So 80-10-10 is a good rule of thumb. Okay. Once you find that property, then you're going to negotiate the deal using your real estate broker. You're going to help negotiate the deal to get it under contract. At least here in Colorado, most contractual periods are around 30 days. And with that 30-day contractual period, it gives you your due diligence period, which is your opportunity to conduct home inspections. You can usually conduct as many or as few home inspections as you would like. So most people will conduct a singular whole home inspection. And then based on the results of that whole home inspection, sometimes we'll have follow-up inspections. So maybe an inspector finds evidence of termites, then you might want to have an actual termite or a pest inspection on top of that. You may have additional add-ons like a radon inspection is very common here in Colorado. You might have an asbestos test. You might have, a sewer line inspection, things like that, roof inspection, HVAC, particular inspections. So a whole home inspector will kind of be a very broad overall, overarching scope of work. And then as they, bring up concerns like, the roof shows some sign of wear and tear, we recommend, getting with a roofing professional to assess the damage further. That's when you would get a roofing professional out to tell you the exact, condition of the roof. So those home inspections are really what are going to keep you from spending tons of money on a property that you didn't think you were going to have to spend. And a lot of times we can negotiate those repairs or even a financial consideration during the transaction. Okay. So make sure that you're always conducting your home inspections. Here in Colorado, the biggest ones, you need to have the roof inspected. You need to scope the sewer line and I always recommend a radon test here in Colorado and then the general home inspection. All right. So make sure that you understand, and this is something, I guess I'm bringing this up later than I probably should have. Earlier in the process, when you're talking with a real estate broker and a lender, it's important to understand any additional costs that might come into play when you're purchasing a home. So first of all, you're going to have closing costs, which usually are a factor of the loan that you're getting on the property. You're going to have prorated property taxes. You're going to have prorated insurance, maybe a prorated HOA, title fees, things like that. So again, here in Colorado, closing costs are usually 1% to 2% of the purchase price of the property. So $500,000 home, closing costs are going to be somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000, just depending on location and things like that. So those are out-of-pocket costs generally. Outside of that, really the only out-of-pocket cost is going to be your inspection. That's going to be paid for separate from the loan and from the closing costs. The appraisal is part of that closing cost as well. And the only other thing that you really need money for is going to be your earnest money. So again, depending on your state, Colorado is an earnest money state. You put earnest money down as a show of good faith that you'd like to purchase the property. In the event that you need to terminate the contract, you can terminate most times and get your earnest money back. So it's just kind of like a deposit that you get back if you don't fulfill the contract. However, there are states out there that are what are called due diligence states, where you have earnest money and due diligence money, where the due diligence money is actually non-refundable. So there's a portion of the money that you put forward right up front that's non-refundable. So you got to be a little bit more sure of that you want to move forward with purchasing the property, right? So make sure you understand those additional costs and what the out-of-pocket costs are going to be in addition to the loan that you may have on the property. Okay. Next piece would be to negotiate efficiently and effectively. So make sure you're negotiating with the seller, especially after the home inspection. This is where we go back and get items fixed that need to be fixed. Maybe get again financial consideration, and obviously you need to have a real estate agent that's willing to negotiate and go to bat for you. Okay. So once you've done that, make sure that I should again backtrack a little bit to where we talk about getting under contract for the first time. Make sure that you're reviewing your purchase agreement in full. Make sure your real estate broker is reviewing that purchase agreement in full with you. If they're not, if they just send over a contract and say, read it and let me know if just sign it if it looks good. I think that real estate broker, it's a long contract. Again, at least here in Colorado, we have a 20 plus page real estate contract, and a lot of it's standardized language, but there's a lot of it that really, buyers need to be aware and understanding of what they're signing, especially because this is a legally binding contract. So make sure that you got a real estate broker that's talking you through the process. Okay. Again, the overall process about 30 days. Most of that's for the acquisition of the loan. But be patient during this process and be diligent to make sure that you're reviewing all the documents that are coming over to you from the lender, reviewing all the documents that are coming to you, disclosures that are coming to you from the real estate side, and just be patient. And be patient in your search. Be patient in your search of the property, right? So take your time, find the right home, and also understand that there's no right or wrong amount of homes to look at. So I always get people that ask, how many homes should I look at before I purchase one? You might find the perfect home on the first try. You might go look at one house and buy one house, and that's okay. If you know what you want, you know what you want. And the more you are a home buyer, the more often you purchase homes, the less homes you'll look at each time, because you'll know exactly what you want and you'll know exactly what you're not willing to live with or live without, right? So for me, I can give you an example. I don't care if the house is perfect, if it's absolutely everything I want, if it's located on a busy street, I don't even want it for free. It's not, I won't live on a busy street. So there are non-negotiables. And so before I even go bother looking at a home, I check to see if it's even on a busy street. Otherwise, I don't even bother going out. When I was a first-time home buyer, that was something that I didn't even think about. It didn't bother me at the time until I lived somewhere that was near busy streets and having windows open. You could hear a lot of traffic, and now that's something that I don't want to live with anymore, right? So you get to know yourself a little bit more as you shop for homes. So consider when you're purchasing or when you're shopping. I think it is important. Some people don't think about this, but I think it really is important to consider the future resale value of a property. So even if you're not planning on moving anytime soon, I'm going to be in this home 10 years, I'm going to be in this home 20 years. I really do think it's important to look at the potential resale value of the home. And so, historically speaking, we've talked about it many times in this podcast, your property value, your real estate value, it's going to increase, right? Over a period of time, you're going to have an increase in property value. But I do think it's important to understand that in certain markets, in sideways markets, where really the buyer doesn't have an advantage, the seller doesn't have an advantage, or especially in a buyer's market where the seller doesn't have an advantage at all, if you have a property that has some less than desirable traits, it's not necessarily about the lack of price that you'll get. There's a point where it just won't sell, period. Again, if you're by railroad tracks, if you're up next to a busy street, unless you have just an absolutely massive discounted price where it would make sense for an investor to come purchase it, there's a potential that you don't sell the property at all, that there's just too many other options. There's too many properties on the market for someone to settle for something that's next to the railroad tracks. So that's really tough, because in a really strong seller's market like we had in 2020, 2021, early 2022, people were just buying what was available. If there was something available, it didn't matter where it was. It didn't matter if it was close to railroad tracks. People were just buying it because they wanted to live somewhere or they wanted to own something. And so a lot of those people did not really consider the future resale value of the properties. And depending on when they go to sell that property, it could be detrimental to the eventual sale of the house. So, a couple of just overall, final legal tips: get everything in writing, right? So just make sure that all your agreements, okay, especially any changes or amendments to the contract or any negotiations that you have with the contract, make sure they're documented in writing. They should be. Your real estate professional should be doing that anyway. And it'll just help avoid misunderstandings and provide a little bit more clarity for everybody during the transaction. So just a quick story about this. One of the things that we tend to see, at least in Colorado, again, is the transfer of personal property on sale. So generally speaking, lenders don't like to see a transfer of personal property. So for example, you can't say, hey, let's say the property's listed for $1 million. You can't say, hey, I'll give you $1,050,000, but you got to leave the Corvette in the garage. Okay. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to get financed for $1,050,000 so that you can keep the car that's in the garage. So you're saying the house is worth $1,050,000 and you're getting the car for free. Lenders don't like that, so they don't want to see personal property involved in transactions, and you usually sign something that says that there's no personal property in the transaction, or there's no value of the personal property in the transaction, and that would have to be, indisputable, right? So if you were like, oh, there's no value to the Corvette, they'd be like, yes, there is value to the Corvette, so you can't do that. So what we've seen is in a lot of real estate transactions, a lot of times we will have a personal property transfer. And what happens is the buyer and the seller will make some type of side agreement about leaving furniture or leaving, a lawnmower or something like that. And none of that's in writing. Okay. So what happens is they make an initial agreement, and there's two things that happen. Either they make that agreement outside of the real estate transaction, kind of a handshake agreement, like, hey, for this price, I'll give you, or I'll leave all the furniture in the property. And we'll say it's worth nothing. We won't tell the lender that there's a personal property, transfer in this. Or the second way you can do it is you can fill out a personal property transfer form or a personal property, sale. It's like a bill of sale for personal property. The problem is if you have a personal property bill of sale, then the buyer does have to pay for it outside of closing with like a check. So if you're leaving, say, $20,000 worth of furniture, not only are you buying the house and need a down payment on the house, but now you need to write a check to the seller for $20,000. That's like the legitimate way to do it. But so many people don't want to do that, don't want to come up with the other $20,000, that they increase the purchase price and just have this handshake agreement that the seller will leave the property or will leave the furniture on the property. Here's where this can come back to bite you, and this has happened before, and this is why I tell this story. You get a property where it goes under contract with a mutual understanding that it is going to be furnished. Okay. But again, we don't want to put that on the contract. We don't want the lender knowing that it's going to be furnished. We don't want we don't want to include the personal property in the transfer of the dealer of the deal of the real estate. It's really just a handshake agreement. And at the beginning of the transaction, everything's hunky dory and everybody's happy with it, and they're under contract for the price they want and everything. But what happens is throughout the contract, as we're going through negotiations of not only maybe the appraisal but the inspection, a lot of times things can become a little bit contentious. So you go back and you ask for things on the inspection as a buyer, and maybe the buyer thinks you're asking for unreasonable things. And you're pushing back and they're pushing back. And now the seller just kind of wants to get rid of the property. And so they feel handcuffed. And so they just move along and they give you what you want for the inspection. Well, what happens now is you have nothing in writing saying that furniture belongs to you or that it's part of the sale. So what happens is the seller gets a little bit upset because they're a little bit contentious and they go, well, I just conceded to $10,000 in inspection items that I didn't think I was going to have to concede to. And now I want to make that $10,000 back. So I'm going to take the furniture. And what happens is the buyer goes to final walkthrough one day before closing, and there's no furniture in the property. Now what happens? Well, they have no retort. They have no way, the buyer has no way to protect themselves against the seller doing that, because the contract itself doesn't include any of the personal property. There's nothing in writing. There's nothing that says that the seller has to leave it. Okay. So the buyer could try to take them to court, but they're not going to win. Okay. Because one of two things is happening. Either A, they are transferring the property and it is on a transfer, but they're claiming that the value is zero because that's what they've told the lender. They've told, yeah, we're getting some personal property, but the value is zero. Okay. They're also telling that to the county. So when the county asks how the sale of the property went, they're going to ask if there was any personal property transferred. And if you tell the county there was no personal property transferred, or the value of the personal property transferred is zero, they're going to have that documented there too. So now if you go to court and try to sue the seller because they took all these items, you're going to sue them for exactly what you said the value was, which is in writing twice agreed upon that there's no value to those items. So you're going to have no recourse to get any of those items back, right? And so that's why it's really important to understand the risks that are involved in something like a personal property transfer. And if you're doing it on the up and up, or you're trying to, sneak something through. So first of all, just get everything in writing. If you get, you have an inspection objection to put together, make sure that your inspection objection, your inspection resolution are in writing, and that they're fully they're written properly. Like the verbiage is written properly. So you're not going to just say, seller to have electrical problems fixed. You're going to have, seller to hire licensed and insured electrician to fix A, B, C, and D, and provide paid invoices and receipts at the end of transaction, right? Because we want to know who took care of it so that we have some recourse if there's a problem in the future. Was it someone licensed, so that if, we know that they're doing it right? Those things need to be distinguished in writing in the contract. Okay. All right. One last thing. And I'm going to tell you a quick story from an experience that I had, but attend a final walkthrough. Okay. So before the closing, generally the day of, or maybe even the day before closing, okay, you're going to attend a final walkthrough to ensure that the property is in the agreed upon condition and that all your negotiated repairs have been completed. So if you negotiated repairs on the inspection objection, you need to go to your final walkthrough to make sure that they've been completed. I used to forego walkthroughs on occasion, especially with vacant properties. So the property was vacant when we showed it, and the property was vacant when we went to buy it. And so you're thinking, okay, what condition of the property could have possibly changed? Especially if maybe you didn't have any objections to any inspection items, nothing would have changed with the property. So I used to forego the inspections. Quick story on this. I actually went to a walkthrough. On a property. This was an investment property that I was purchasing with two partners. And the day before closing is when I went to do the walkthrough. So I went around 5:00 at night and walked through the property. Everything was fine. We're on our way to closing the next morning at 9 a.m. We're literally on the way to closing. Okay. And the selling agent or the listing agent calls and says, "Hey, Nick, we have a little bit of a problem." I said, "Okay, what's that?" He says, "The house is flooded." What had happened was the refrigerator, the line that connects to the refrigerator for the water, for the ice machine and for the water dispenser, had come disconnected from the refrigerator and had poured into the house. Now, obviously, it happened sometime between 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. the night before and 8 a.m. the next morning. Okay. And it dumped hundreds and hundreds of gallons onto the main floor, which then went down the stairs and also soaked through the floor into the ceiling, ruined the basement. Okay. And this was a brand new remodeled property. Long story short, we ended up just extending closing. He used insurance proceeds, fixed the house, cleaned it all up, and we bought it, 3 weeks later, a month later. Okay. The thing that I learned from this walkthrough was that not only should you walk through, but I think you should walk through right prior to closing if you can. Okay. And if in the event that something comes up right prior to close, you don't have to close. You can go have a renegotiation at that point. You can delay your closing. You can go sign your documents and not fund the closing. There's all kinds of things that you can do in that last minute scenario that something happens. But the moral of the story for me was, had that agent not gone over the next morning, this was a rental property for us. And so I didn't have any urgency after closing to get back over to the property. Okay. So it probably would have been another week or so before I went back over to the property. I would have gone back over to that property a week later to find not hundreds of gallons, but probably tens of thousands of gallons of water leaked into the property, a completely flooded out property, destroyed on a completely different level than it was. And I would not have known when it happened. So in this event, it happened prior to close, which means if it happens prior to close, it's the seller's responsibility to take care of it. Now, in this case, we would not have known, and we could not have assumed that it was that it happened prior to close because I was there 5 p.m., 6 p.m. the night before. The chances that it happened in those, 12 hours versus the next 7 days are pretty slim. So we would have had to assume that it happened in those next 7 days, which means we would have had to claim the water loss on our insurance and lost months worth of rent, deductible, increased insurance premiums, all kinds of stuff, right? So that was a very valuable lesson that I learned. And unfortunately, it didn't cost me anything. But I learned not only should you always do a walkthrough, but you should do your walkthrough as close to closing as possible. And in the event that you don't, you should make sure that you go post-closing right over to the property. But if you're going to go post-closing, you might as well go pre-closing. So that's my final piece of advice is with the walkthrough. And so, like I said, I learned a very good lesson with that piece, making sure that we're always checking out our property before we finalize the documents and put hundreds of thousands of dollars of our hard-earned money or future money at least into a property. So that is it for today. I hope you've learned something about the home buying process. Feel free to forward this on to a friend or a family member that might be looking to purchase a home. We'd love the opportunity to serve them with our real estate team here in Denver metro area, and we also have great referring partners outside of Denver metro. So if you know anybody that's looking to move out of state, know anybody that's looking to move into state from out of state, please give them our information. We're happy to help them if they're moving in or send them in the right direction if they're moving out. So take this information, use it for what you will. Go buy your first house, your next house, whatever it may be, and have a great holiday season. I think we'll be seeing one more podcast before the end of the year, and then we'll see you in 2024. So remember, go out, live big.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Live Big podcast. For even more real estate and investment resources, go to blackyetigroup.com/resources and download Nick's complete guide to running your own rental properties. Tune back in next week for another episode, and until then, live big.
Live Big does not provide investment, legal, or tax advice, and nothing herein should be construed as being financial, legal, tax, or other advice. Live Big does not represent that any securities or services discussed are suitable for any investor. No investment or other decision should be made solely based on the contents or information found on the website or podcast. When making a decision about your investments, you should seek the advice of a professional financial advisor or qualified expert.